Grace and peace be unto you, sisters and brothers. I greet you this day with delight and with joy, welcoming you to our time of study, our lesson hour, as we continue in our theme for the month of September, meeting Jesus again, or for the first time. It is a way of contextualizing the life and the ministry of the Savior, so that we can appreciate him not just in the context of his earthly pilgrimage, but we can certainly extrapolate from the commitments that he made what would be the same commitments that ought to be made by those of us who are followers of the Christ, those of us who are disciples of his teachings, those of us who continue to promulgate and represent the religion of Jesus. So for the last 3 weeks, we have been trying to lay in these broad strokes ways of appreciating Jesus' life, his words, against the backdrop of first century Palestine, his identity as a poor Jew in ethnic minority, under the rule and the occupation of a larger majority. But today I want to really lay claim about the foundation of Jesus' work being the love ethic. And so I invite you to share, host a watch party, invite persons to come and join in so that we can be mutually enriched by looking at the Word of God. So let's pray. Eternal God, be our guide and counselor in this hour. Illumine the path for us so that we might gain an understanding into the truth that you represent. Bless us for our time together, our sharing. In the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. You are welcome to make your comments or queries known in the comment section, either on YouTube or Facebook Live. And those comments will come to me throughout the hour, and I hope to enrich the dialogue. I want you to hear the claims that I want to set forth with certain passages of Scripture in mind. I don't want to necessarily give them away quickly. I want you to hear them, and I want them to come to mind. And if they come to mind, if you're hearing a particular narrative of the Gospels leaping at you, feel free to post it in the comments so that it could be a blessing for others. I know, given this format, it is not as easy to do the kind of dialogue with which we are familiar, but as much as it's possible, if you would use the comment section to share some of the ideas, things that are going off in you that will be helpful for those of us who are also tuning in. So, fundamentally, I want to lay a claim today that it advances essentially this, that at the center of the religion of Jesus is the love ethic. Right? At the very center of the religion of Jesus is the love ethic. And we get this sense with Jesus beginning his work, starting his work with the simple teaching concerning love in what is the timeless words of Israel recorded in the Old Testament, called the Shema Israel. heart, this soul, this mind. Some people may parse them as three separate entities in one, but in the Hebrew, there is no division of heart, soul, mind. There is the totality of self, which is connoted in the soul, the fullness of one's being without division, that you can't turn, because when they spoke of heart, it was not speaking of the muscle in the center of the chest pumping blood. It was the seat of emotions, the will, your nerve center of consent, that which permits one to either yield to the will of God or to rebel against the will of God. And so this positive, if you will, way of restating it in multiple terms is to flesh out that there is no part of the one who is committed to God that ought to be left without complete surrender or without a willingness to do God's will for that life. Now, this becomes the guiding principle, the oneness of God, because the ancient Near East culture was a pretty polytheistic world with lesser deities believed to handle certain areas of life. Certainly the Canaanites had all kinds of gods, supreme God, and then gods of fertility and gods of other concerns. And Israel was not ignorant to that reality. As a matter of fact, if you trace her history post deliverance from Egypt, through the books of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, and you go to the prophets, what the prophets indict her, it's constantly a crisis of her not being able to remain faithful to the God who had delivered her and the God who had cut covenant with her at the region of Sinai. And this becomes the recurring enticement and the recurring moral failure of her life. And even in this past Sunday's sermon, both the text proper for preaching and the background information, it becomes clear, right? If when she asks the question, is not the Lord in Zion, is not her king in her, there's this parenthetical remark that becomes a part of the editorializing of the text, representing God's retort to such an inquiry. Yeah, but why have you constantly projected false images and idols in my face, right? It's the response that comes because the issue of idolatry, the issue of chasing other gods, seems to be almost endemic in the way she understands and sees and practices religion. And Jesus then would come on the scene with the same belief, with the same conviction that there ought to be some singleness of devotion, some undivided loyalty granted to God because of the history that they have had with God and the might and the power that God has already demonstrated that they know very well. And as a result, that ought to have kept them tethered to that relationship, but that was not the case. But what Jesus does in this particular recitation of what was so ingrained in the Jewish people of his day, which was so much a part of the proceedings of the synagogue, right? The synagogue being not just a religious center, but a center of culture, a community center, if you will, that held together the teachings of the people. Because you'll recall by now, we've got the first temple being destroyed, right? 586 BC, Babylonian captivity, that invasion. And in the days of the prophet Haggai, where Cyrus, the Persian emperor, would permit people to return, right? This is all backstory that's important to appreciating and understanding that which brings Jesus on the scene. There is the rebuilding of a second temple, right? And I know that chronologically the books are not always arranged in the ways that would help us appreciate the chronology of events. But in the book of Ezra, when there, I think around chapter 3, there is a record of the laying of the foundation of the second temple, right? And there's a crowd who's there, and there is a great noise that's occurring, and some people are crying and some people are rejoicing. The people who are rejoicing are the people who have not seen the previous temple. So they're born either in captivity or post-captivity. These are the ones who did not know the horror of the desecration of the former temple. But then there are those who were old enough to have lived through the desecration and destruction of the former temple, who are looking at the foundations of the new one and are really hurt because the second one is not as glorious as the first one. And the editorial note about that scene is that you really couldn't tell the difference of who was crying and who was rejoicing. It was all just a noise. Now, in the time between first and second temple arises a group would call the Pharisees, whose focus was on the law. Because the temple and the priestly class, their focus was on sacrifice. So with the emergence of a second temple, you've got temple where sacrifice and worship is taking place, and then you have synagogue where there is teaching. Seats in the synagogue for the expounding of the word, the instructing of the ways, the teaching of the over 600 laws of the faith. But in the temple, no seats, just instruments and furnitures for sacrifices to be made, incense, etc., those kinds of things. So Jesus is coming in this role when he's instructing about the Shema Israel. He's adding something to it that has ethical import, listen, for behavior. Listen, he would say, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and soul and might, and thy neighbor as thyself. Yeah. So, FMBC disciple members will recall that on the first Sunday of February 2019, my sermonic text was was on this Deuteronomy passage paired with what Jesus is saying, right? And entitling it First Things First, right? Trying to lay down that you will never go wrong when you order your life and give God first place. And as a corollary, you'll never go wrong when the second order becomes equally important as the first order, and you love people like you love yourself. Yes. Now, the modern commentator and the modern critic will come to say, but you cannot love someone until you love yourself. Because that's the way we want to layer our psychology over it. But Jesus seems to be suggesting that in the love of neighbor and love of self, there ought not be any distinction, no division, no qualifying what it means, except to say you would not do to another what you would not have done to yourself, or what you would not commit to yourself, you ought not commit to another. So you would ask, well, if I don't treat myself well, I'm not going to treat others well either. But that's not the natural flow from love of God. If one is engaged in the love of God, right? If love of God is primary, then what flows from that can only be genuine and authentic, right? Because the inauthentic cannot flow from the love of God, right? It just can't flow. So if the secondary matter is flawed, it's flawed fundamentally because what is primary seems to be out of sorts. Because that which we receive from God is authentic, is genuine. And because it is the precipitating factor that gives us ability to love others in ways that are affirming of ourselves, that is what makes it possible. It is not, listen, it is not that we have the capacity in and of ourselves to do it. It is that we do it in response to what we have received of Him. Right? This is the Johannine epistle. Right? It is not that we love God first. No, it is that God loved us first, and our response of love to God is nothing other than a response to what God has initiated. So, if I have received from Him and I live in that love, and I live in that embrace, and I live in that redemption, I am able to extend it to others because I have received it from Him. Now here's why it's important. It's because Jesus, when He adds, or when He gives this addendum, this amendment, loving neighbor as self, He is making clear to us that there is a moral obligation. There's a moral obligation, moral obligation and an ethical imperative to the practice of our faith if we are claiming to be recipients first, and then conduits second of that love. Right? So, in one of the stories of the New Testament, there's someone who wants to ask Jesus, Who is my neighbor? Because he wants to be clear about what it means to be in relationship with other people. This is important. And then Jesus would tell the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus would tell the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, already, the legend of the Good Samaritan, the very moniker, the nomenclature, the title, the designation, Good Samaritan, it bespeaks the suspicions that people had on Samaritans, right? Because no one would say the good Jew, but they said the Good Samaritan. And they said the Good Samaritan because there was a certain antipathy that Jews had with Samaritans of the day. And Jesus is intentional about the use of an ethnic figure that would disrupt what they thought to be the dominant ideology of their people, particularly when they viewed people who were not of their fold. This is important. So when he tells the story of the Good Samaritan, when he shares this story, he shares it in a way that will disarm the questioner about who is neighborly, right? He's trying to disarm him. And he does it in a way that will get at the point of the moral obligation to the neighbor. So the expert in the law is testing him, and he's responding with love of God, love of neighbor. He would say, do this and live. This is Luke chapter 10, around verses 25 to 37. But then the expert in the law wants to know, who is my neighbor? And so Jesus is saying, a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, attacked by robbers, stripped of clothes, beaten, left half dead, seen by a priest, passed on the other side, seen by a Levite, passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, verse 33, travels, comes where the man was, sees him, takes pity on him, goes to him, bandages his wounds, pours oil and wine on it, puts the man on his donkey, brings the man to an inn, takes care of him, pays his expenses, and says, I'm coming back, and if he incurs any expenses, I'll take care of it. Now this is health care, right? For someone who has been beaten by the system of people who not only attack him, but people who neglect him. And Jesus, verse 36, asks, which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert in the law replies, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus says, go and do likewise. So Jesus tells us of what happens when this man responds to a human need, listen, across the barriers of class, of race, and condition. And what he ultimately helps us understand is that every person is potentially your neighbor, regardless of their class, their race, their condition. Neighborliness, according to Jesus, is non-spatial. It's not about who lives to the left and the right of you, the front and the back. It's non-spatial. It's qualitative. And that we are mandated to love our neighbor directly, clearly, and permit no barriers to come between us. Now this is important because especially as we have seen and heard this ongoing strife of racial injustice in America, we seldom deal with it out of a theology of neighborliness, right? Because for us, neighbor theology isn't strong enough. But neighbor theology was strong enough for Jesus to give us the story and to lay upon us the ethical imperative, the moral obligation that we ought be concerned for the other with the same regard that we are concerned for our own selves. Now, this is no easy option for Jesus, simply because what Jesus is doing is laying a twofold mandate upon us as he took upon himself. One, a part of the mandate is to love those who are a part of the household of Israel, and to risk becoming their enemy because he is going to be regarded as a perverter of the truth because of what he does in the second part of the mandate. Right? This is important because something in human beings creates this clannish mentality, right? A sense of us versus them, a clannish mentality that only likes dealing with people who are our kind. And it's comforting because it helps to reinforce and keep in place what we enjoy and keep at bay what will threaten the enjoyment of that comfort and security. But the second part of what Jesus does, to love those beyond the house of Israel, the Samaritan, and even the Roman, would make him more an enemy of the people whom he had come to love primarily as one who is from their house. Right? This is, see, because Jesus, he came to show us a different way. He came to show us how we could truly embody the love of God and not become so insulated in our own people that we foreclose the possibility that that same love could be shared beyond our borders. Yeah. Because for us, that's the part of the grace of God that's scandalous. That God should include other people with us, right? Now we're not going to admit it readily, but we operate with it, especially when we prejudge or just knowingly, outrightly judge people based upon what we perceive of them, what we know of them, what their past may have been. Right? And in doing that, what we're establishing is a committee that God has not constituted to review God's right, God's sovereign right, to pour out the same grace on others that we have received. We've received the grace, we're in the family, and what we want God to do once we get in the family is shut the door behind us so nobody else can come in after us. We okay with who's already in there because we got in. But we don't particularly want, a whole lot of other folks get in. Especially if they're not like us. Now, if they grew up on our street, right? They from the same small town as we are from, that's, we know them. But if they're from somewhere else, God, maybe you don't want this one. And quite frankly, I'm glad that God is a committee of one when it comes to the committee of redemption. I'm glad God is a committee of one, because if it had to go by the way of human affirmation, yes, we know that we would not be as gracious and merciful as God has been to us. So Jesus works out this love ethic in the story of the Good Samaritan, and even the story of the Syrophoenician woman who is coming to beg of Jesus something from him. And I want to commend the Gospel of Luke to you. I really want to commend it to you, because what Luke does primarily is reveal to us the expansive vision of God toward the world. It's expansive. It's never exclusive. It's always expanding. Read the stories, read the narratives of how he's including people who would not ordinarily factor or figure into a story as a protagonist. But he does so because he appreciates what is he's writing looking back, right? So not writing as it's unfolding, writing in reflection. So he understands and appreciates what is taking place in the movement of the Spirit in the Acts of the Apostles toward a more global vision. So he's laying this out in Luke so you can appreciate that in the book of Acts. But I want you to read the book for an appreciation for what it means, and to see how Jesus is applying this love ethic outside of the borders of Israel, for which he will end up being put to death. Now, not only does he apply the love ethic to the Samaritan, to the Syrophoenician woman, he also applies it to the Roman. And this is a hard task, because to tamper with the enemy is to court disaster. To hate the enemy in any way was to incur the wrath of Rome. But to love the enemy, the Roman, is to be regarded as a traitor to Jesus' own people, right? And yet, this is the anvil upon which Jesus is hammering out his concept of love for one's enemies. Now, this is what American Christianity has forgotten, that the religion of Jesus is not a religion that uses carnal power to keep people in place. It's a religion that harnesses the power of God from within to give people dignity, even those who stand with their backs against the wall. Right? Let me say that again. The religion of Jesus is clear that you do not use carnal power, i.e. power of state, to control, to coerce, to afflict, to subjugate people. But you use the power of God from within to, one, maintain your own dignity and humanity, and to do it on behalf of people whose dignity and humanity are being denigrated by the carnal powers that simply want to control them. But to do it, you have to appreciate these three groups of enemies. There are three groups of enemies. I'm going to lay this out. Three groups of enemies that Jesus lives and practices the love ethic with. One, there are personal enemies. And a personal enemy is one who had some identity, some intimacy with you based upon your primary group. The relationship was grounded in some personal association, and that association has entered into conflict. The strained relationship, a sermon would say, may have been due to the evil work of a vicious tongue. And the point is that the enemy, in this sense, is one at some time who was an intimate part of your world and was close enough to have been considered a friend. Right? Now, we've all had broken relationships, feelings of betrayal, some misunderstanding, some harsh words spoken with someone who was close to us. And to love the person, as I have given the definition of love, as a working definition of love, to seek the other's good, seeking the other's good, seek the other's good. That's how I define, that's my working definition of love. Not sentimentality, not just affinity, because quite frankly, feelings can be fleeting. They can pass. And I don't want you to deal with me just on feelings, because any one of us could wake up on the wrong side of the bed. But what must be more substantive than feeling is a motivating principle that urges us to go beyond feeling and seek the person's good. What is going to be good for the other? And if what is good for the other is my being silent about a situation, then I must practice that good by being silent. Yeah. Even if that silence does not permit me an opportunity to mount a defense to what is being said. Yeah. And to love that person, to seek that good, Thurman would argue, is to seek reconciliation. The will to re-establish a relationship. For that to happen, there has to be a confession of error and the seeking to be restored to one's former place. This is what Jesus says, that if thou were to bring your gifts to the altar, And while you're bringing your gifts to the altar, you remember that your brother, your sister has an issue against you. He says, don't wait till the sacrifice is over. No, leave the gift there. Go to that brother, that sister, and be reconciled. And then come back and offer your gift. Oh, Jesus. Right? This is what he says. Go, leave your gift. Which, now. See, this is important because do not place the making of sacrifice above the mandate of living on right terms with your brother or sister. That's what Jesus is saying. If I can contemporize it, I guess it's I'm really borrowing words from a late preacher, Frederick G. Sampson, who was a longtime pastor of the Tabernacle Baptist Church in Detroit, Michigan. But Sampson would say it like this, now of blessed memory, some 18 years rather. He would say it like this: it's not how high you jump when you shout, but it's how straight you walk when you come down. Right? This is because we could make the rituals of the sanctuary paramount to the practice of brother and sisterhood. And when you do it, your shout will have an echo, because if you can hear, you may be able to hear the echo. This is an empty space now. And so you could hear the sound bouncing off the walls and bouncing back to me. He says, that's how your sacrifice will be heard, with echoes, because it's empty and hollowness in it. It doesn't rest on anything. Right? So you gotta, now we've interpreted this narrowly to the sense that my natural claim of love is only to those who are close to me, people of my own kind. So black people deal with it only in the sense of black people, and white people deal with it only in the sense of white people. Forgive those of your kind only. But Jesus is pushing the barrier, pushing the boundary to love beyond Israel by including the Samaritan and by including the Roman. Yeah. That's the first group of enemy. Here's the second group. Time is getting away from me. The second group of enemy represent those who make it difficult for you to live without shame and humiliation. That's what Thurman offers. They are, if you think of it in terms of concentric circles, that first group might be family and close friends. And then the second group might be people you know, just, acquaintances. These people are those who will conspire with the oppressor in order to keep you confined in a space. Now, in the day of Jesus, these were tax collectors. Yeah, tax collectors. You recall the story of whom? Zacchaeus, right? Who's up in the tree looking for Jesus, and Jesus sees him in the tree, tells him come down. And what does Jesus do? He goes to his house, right? He spends time. Now appreciate why this is so contemptible to Israel. Because these tax collectors, these were some low-down folks. because they were ethnically Jewish, but they were doing Rome's bidding. They were the grasping hand of Roman authority, filching from Israel taxes to help keep alive the oppression of the Gentile ruler. They knew the psychology of the people and exploited that psychology by being spiritually ruthless. And to love these kind of people would be an insult to Israel, because you're loving the people who got their hands around our necks, choking us out. You're loving those people and you're losing the status and the respect of the community. Right? They believed tax collectors had lost their souls. They lost their souls. And when Jesus becomes a friend of the tax collectors and he makes them intimate companions, it was a spiritual triumph, but it was also an indictment against him according to the people who would not permit the love of God to go beyond just themselves. Yeah. And the reason Jesus decides to love them is because he sees them as sons of Abraham too. Yeah. He it never fails to impress upon me what is a high bar for being a Jesus follower. The burden, the ethical burden upon us is always that we rise above our pettiness in order to truly seize what Jesus is saying to us. And that's problematic, because staying to ourselves within our group gives us a certain degree of comfort. But having to go beyond that to others makes us uneasy. And it's hard, because Jesus says that to love that kind of person means that you have to uproot, listen, the bitterness of betrayal in your own heart. See, we believe that when we've been offended, we have a right to be offended, and a right to remember it, and a right to deal with you any kind of way. But Jesus is saying, no, you've got to uproot the bitterness of betrayal in your own heart, because that could become corrosive to your own soul. And then you ought to go a step further. You understand and appreciate how a person became as they are. You've got to love them fundamentally with a regard for their humanity that counters their disregard for your own. Now this is important, because this is the love ethic of Jesus, and it's the love ethic of Martin King. If you read Martin King's Strength to Love, he lays out these claims that loving self and neighbor are one and the same ethical mandate because of this mutuality that we share, that I cannot violate in the other the breath of God that is in my own life. Because the only way to redeem that person is to treat them like they are myself, and that they need what I need. And if they need what I need, I must be driven to offer unto them that which I have received for myself. This is it. Let me give you this third group. The third group of enemies, as we got in Jesus' day, was Rome. Both personal and impersonal. Both religious and political. Moral enemy. Right? People who believed in the cult worship of the emperor. And you recall a story of a Roman centurion who comes to Jesus and on behalf of a son, and he understands the social distinctions between his people, and so man says, no, you don't even have to come under my roof. You can just speak the word and it could be performed. And how that becomes such a stumbling block for people who cannot fathom God's limitless, boundless grace and initiative. When Jesus pushes us to love the Roman, here's what it means. It means take him out of the classification of enemy. This is important. See, because as long as you're talking about a person in the abstract, you can justify the hatred you feel toward them. And this is what social media does for us as well. We would say things in our posts that you wouldn't say to someone in their face, because you got the requisite distance to make the claim. But Jesus challenges us to take the person with whom you have the issue out of the abstract and look at them as human, establish a primary face-to-face relationship of equality with them, so that they neither emerge as Roman or Jew, but they emerge as two spirits found in a mutual way, both seeking understanding. And as long as we are seeing that this was the historical moral failure of American Christianity with respect to Africans in this nation. They never looked at us as human beings, looking at us only as property. That's what permits the insidious institution to have existed for so long. They are savages, beasts, not brothers and sisters. And that's the same mentality that we have today. When you use the term, the N-word, right? When you use that term, it's a way of dehumanizing the person and justifying your hate. And if I am hating what is not human, I'm okay. But if I am hating what is human, I am committing offense not just against human, but myself. Because my humanity and their humanity are one and the same. Let the white supremacists and the racists get shot and need some blood. You look at bags of blood and tell me which one is white blood and which one is black. This is the issue. That as long as you can look at someone other than being human, you will be justified. You will feel justified. But if you look at them as my brother, my sister, now, my time is gone, but I understand, because someone is saying, doesn't this place an inordinate burden on the disinherited? Is this not another burden you are placing on people who are already crushed? I mean, and I kind of feel like it does, until I understand what Jesus is trying to do. He's trying to give the disinherited, the underprivileged, the oppressed. Listen, this is important, and share this with your white friends. This is important. To give them the kind of dignity that they need so they don't lose their own souls, being raptured in the hatred of their oppressor. You see, in the minds of a whole lot of white folks in America is the belief that if black people ever got the kind of power that they enjoy, they would do to white people what white people have done to black folks. But what you fail to understand is that we know too much Jesus to exchange that role of oppressed for oppressor. And we have 400 years in this land of evidence to show you we're better than that. What the families of the Charleston Nine did in that courtroom when Dylann Roof was indicted and arraigned, forgave him without him even apologizing. It shows that we have met Jesus a long time. We've been practicing a faith, not that you gave us, but one that we knew to be real. And we're just trying to invite you to practice it with us. And so Jesus, the religion of Jesus, says to the disinherited, and I'm done, love your enemy. Love your enemy. Not get even. Love your enemy. And in so doing, you've loved yourself. You've loved God. Blessings of God be upon you.